Sometimes love means saying no. Not because you don't care, but because you finally remembered how much you should care about yourself. They say weddings are about new beginnings, but for Eleanor Martin, the day her son got married almost became the end of everything that mattered. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late spring, the kind where the scent of blooming magnolias dances with the memory of what once was. Eleanor stood alone on the porch of her old Victorian house in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the sun filter through the tall oaks. A silence hung in, the air thick and unforgiving. Today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life, but she hadn't been invited. Her hand trembled slightly as she held her coffee mug, her gaze fixed at nothing. On the kitchen table behind her, a wedding invitation lay unopened for weeks, not addressed to her. Not anymore. Pain doesn't always announce itself with screams. Sometimes it lives quietly in the cracks of a teacup, or in the fading scent of your husband's sweater still hanging in the closet. 10 years after he passed away, Eleanor wasn't angry. Anger is loud. Eleanor felt something harder to name, something heavier. Betrayal. From the boys she once prayed over in hospital hallways, the boys she carried through infertility clinics, the boys she traded sleep, dreams, and her youth for. Her Thomas Dot. But now Thomas had changed, and she didn't know who turned the light off inside him. But she'd watched it dim ever since Vanessa walked into his life. Sometimes love means saying no. Not because you don't care, but because you've finally remembered how much you should care about yourself. If stories like these move you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You never know who needs to hear this today. Mom, it's just a house, he'd said 3 months ago. Why can't you let it go? 'Cause it wasn't just wood. And walls too. Her. It was where her husband, James, danced with her in the living room under a flickering ceiling light. Where Thomas took his first steps, falling into her arms. Where late-night shifts ended in quiet breakfasts alone as he slept upstairs. And where every framed photo on the wall whispered a story she'd fought to preserve. And they wanted her to sell it for a wedding. They need help. He'd said Vanessa's family spent a fortune already. Eleanor had offered help. A more modest ceremony. Financial wisdom. Not everything, not this home. But Vanessa wanted grandeur. And Thomas, caught in her shadow, wanted peace. The ultimatum came over a cup of coffee in a cold cafe. He stared down at his phone the whole time. If you won't help us, it's probably better you don't come. She had smiled then, not because she was okay, but because that's what mothers do when their hearts collapse. They smile so their sons don't see the wreckage. That was the last time she saw him, Beatrice. Eleanor's oldest friend and a retired librarian from the same nursing home center where Eleanor still volunteered twice a week, called every few days. Still no call? No, Eleanor would answer, stirring her tea in silence. Beatrice was full of fury and sass, the kind of woman who wore red lipstick to the grocery store and never apologized for speaking the truth. That fancy girl has him wrapped around her French manicured finger. I bet she's never scrubbed a toilet in her life. Eleanor smiled weakly, but something about today, the quietness of it, the ache in her bones felt final. Like an erasure, she walked to the hallway where the carved wooden telephone table still stood old like everything else in the house. She remembered when James had surprised her with it, just to hold the answering machine. The phone rang, an unknown number. She hesitated. Hello, Mrs. Martin. Yes, my name is Rebecca. I know this is out of the blue, but Ty used to live with Vanessa. Silence. I think your son's in danger. Eleanor's heart skipped. I'm sorry. What? I don't have much time. Vanessa isn't who she says she is. She's done this before with 2 others. She targets men with stable families. From working-class backgrounds, men with mothers they love. You were never the problem, Mrs. Martin. You were the pattern. Eleanor gripped the edge of the dining table. The outside noises dulled. Her breath slowed. I have proof, Rebecca whispered. Emails, voicemails, Recording she's planning to disappear after the wedding once she has access to certain accounts. How do I know you're telling the truth? I kept it all because she did this to my brother's friend too, 2 years ago. He nearly took his life. I couldn't let another family fall apart. And just like that, something ancient stirred inside Eleanor, something she hadn't felt in years, a spine of steel. A mother's fire. Thomas wasn't lost. He was drowning with a smile on his face. She hung up, hands trembling, and called, "Beatrice." "Oh no, you are not going alone," Beatrice said before Eleanor even asked. "We're getting in that car and fixing this. But what if he doesn't believe me? Then we'll bring the proof. And if that's not enough, we'll make him feel what love sounds like when it won't let you go." Eleanor put on her best dress. Not because she needed to impress, but because she needed to feel her worth stitched into her sleeves. She wrapped James's old watch around her wrist, the one he used to call his lucky charm. As she grabbed her coat, she paused by the front door. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer a place of Panette was her power. The sky had begun to shift from soft blue to the amber gold of early afternoon, as Eleanor and Beatrice drove toward the Rosewood estate, a sprawling, picture-perfect venue tucked just outside the Charleston city limits. In the passenger seat, Eleanor held Rebecca's printed documents like sacred scriptures, screenshots of Vanessa's messages to past victims, photos of engagement rings repeated across timelines, voicemail recordings where Vanessa bragged about how easy it was to manipulate. Insecure men who just want to prove they've made something of themselves. Beatrice drove like she was still 35, fearless and focused. "She picked the Rosewood, of course she did," Beatrice muttered. "It screams excess for approval." Eleanor smiled weakly, but she didn't have the energy to joke. Her heart was a tight knot of fear and fury, a strange, burning clarity that she'd felt only once before. The day she almost lost Thomas to meningitis when he was 5. That same urgency. That same cold sweat of decision. Scared he won't. "Believe me," Eleanor said quietly. Beatrice shot her a glance. "Sweetheart, you carried him through 3 miscarriages and 7 rounds of IVF. You outlived your husband, worked double shifts to send that boy to college, and never asked for one damn thing in return. If he can't see the truth in your eyes, on him, not you." The estate came into view, white columns rising like ivory towers, adorned in cascading floral arches. In pastel suits and silky gowns, laughed and posed for photos. The smell of roses and champagne hung in the air. It looked like the cover of a wedding magazine, and Eleanor wasn't supposed to be part of it. They parked just down the road. Beatrice handed Eleanor a mirror. "Check your face. You're about to change the direction of someone's life." Eleanor adjusted. Her lipstick traced a fine line under her tired eyes. She saw her reflection, but more than just her face, she saw her journey, her losses, her resolve. "Let's go." They walked in with purpose, neither hiding nor hesitating. Most guests were too distracted to notice. A violinist played softly near the garden aisle. Servers passed trays of roes and tiny salmon bites. Eleanor asked, eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces. "Thomas?" Beatrice nudged her subtly. "There." By a manicured hedge, Thomas stood beside his groomsman. He looked older than Eleanor remembered, and yet thinner, like something in him had been hollowed out. His tuxedo was sharp, the gold cufflinks expensive, but his smile didn't reach. His eyes. Vanessa was nearby, speaking to the wedding coordinator like royalty at a press briefing. Slim-fitting white dress, designer heels, every inch curated, controlled. "I have to be smart about this," Eleanor whispered. "I can't just blurt it out." "Then we follow the plan," Beatrice said. "Find a quiet moment, present the proof, speak with love, but stand your ground." Suddenly, Vanessa turned and locked eyes with Eleanor. For a moment, the world paused. A flicker of recognition, then something else, panic. Vanessa quickly leaned into Thomas. whispering while pointing discreetly toward Eleanor. His expression shifted, confused, then annoyed. He started walking across the reception space. Toward her. "Here he comes," Eleanor said. Heart-pounding dot when Thomas reached her. His brows were already narrowed. "Mom? What the hell are you doing here? I need 5 minutes." "That's exactly why I'm here." Thomas glanced around, irritation flaring in his voice. "This is not the time, Mom. Do you have any idea how much this day means to Vanessa and me?" "I know exactly how much it means to you," she said quietly, "and that's why I'm here." Beatrice stepped back, respectfully, as Eleanor reached. He grabbed the folder reluctantly, flipping through the pages, his expression tightening with every new revelation. His body went still. When he heard the first voicemail, Mavensa, bragging, laughing. The air around him shifted. He wasn't breathing. She said, "These are fakes. Someone's just jealous." Thomas muttered, shaking his head. "They're not." Eleanor replied, "They came from her roommate. She's trying to stop what's happened before from happening again." Thomas looked down at the documents again, eyes scanning with growing terror. No, this isn't real." "Vanessa wouldn't. She has," Eleanor interrupted gently. "More than once. And she's about to do it to you." Thomas staggered backward. I don't know what to think." "Why are you doing this now?" "Because a mother's love doesn't expire with an invitation," she said. "You may be a man now, but you'll always be my son. And if standing between you and a mistake that could ruin you forever makes me the villain today, ... I'll accept it." There was no anger in her voice, just sorrow. "She's outside the courthouse with legal documents from one of the other grooms." Thomas looked at them, his mother, her friend. The truth and everything inside him broke. "Give me the phone." Eleanor exhaled for the first time in hours. Thomas stood frozen beneath the floral archway meant to be his altar. Now nothing but a frail stage for a powerful reckoning. Rebecca's video call played out in front of him as if he were watching someone else's life collapse. She spoke, calmly, factually, while holding up legal documents, letters from attorneys, complaints filed by past victims. Her voice trembled only when she described how one of the past fiancés had lost his home. "She targets good men with something to prove," Rebecca said, "especially if they come from single mothers." "There's a pattern, Thomas. You're not her partner. You're her next paycheck." Vanessa was still across the patio, sipping champagne with her bridesmaids, oblivious to the wreckage unraveling. 50 feet away until Thomas suddenly turned toward her, his steps fast, his face pale. Eleanor didn't follow. She stayed rooted in place, heart racing. Beatrice placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Let the truth handle the rest." Thomas reached Vanessa just as the wedding planner called out, "We're starting the seating in 5, everyone." Grab Vanessa's shoulder, not violently, but urgently. "We need to talk." "Now," he said through clenched teeth. She blinked hard. "Thomas, what's going on?" He lowered his voice, but his tone shook with rage. "I just spoke with..." Rebecca, everything in her face changed. Not panic. Calculation. Seriously? She's crazy. "How did you even..." "She showed me documents, voicemails, legal filings, emails with your photos sent to 3 other families. You conned them, just like you're conning me." Her expression folded into something dark and venomous. "You believe her over me, some jealous ex-roommate." Thomas looked at her, long and hard. "I asked you once if I was the first guy you were engaged to. You said yes. I am not going to stand here and defend myself when you don't have to defend yourself, Vanessa." He reached into his jacket and handed her the documents. Eleanor had given him, "You can try, but the truth doesn't need spin." Vanessa scanned the page. Her lips tightened. Her mask faltered. "Oh, please," she hissed, just low enough to hide from guests walking by. "You think your little sob-story mother and her geriatric sidekick have a shred of credibility? She couldn't even write a check for the wedding." Thomas flinched just enough. There it was. Her real voice. Vanessa leaned in inches from his face. You may be charming in courtrooms, baby, but in real life, you're still the little boy crying for his mommy. Pathetic. He didn't move. Just looked at her for a long time until something broke behind his eyes. But it wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. You really should have stopped talking 10 seconds ago, he said quietly. Then he turned to the crowd and clapped his hands once. Sorry, folks. Quick change of plans. Everyone turned. Cameras paused. Vanessa's face lost all color. Thomas stepped up to the small platform beneath the ceremony arch and used the microphone the officiant had just set up. I want to thank you all for being here. I know this isn't how any of us pictured today going, but something important happened in the last hour, and it demands honesty. Suddenly, it was silent. Bridal guests from both families sipping champagne, dabbing sweat with lace napkins, looked confused. Curious? My mother. He gestured toward Eleanor in the back. Just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Vanessa rushed forward, face bright red. He's lying. He's having a breakdown. No, Thomas said, clearing his throat. What I had was a blind spot I called love. There was a gasp in the crowd, and now I don't. He looked right at Vanessa. You used me, lied to me, about everything. The past engagements, the reasons your family distanced themselves from you, the money. You manipulated the one person who never stopped showing up for me, even when I pushed her away. Vanessa started to cry, but it wasn't grief, it was strategy. She reached for his hand, voice cracking. Please, Thomas, this is humiliating. Don't do this. He shrugged off her touch. What's humiliating is how many chances you had to come clean. How many times my mom gave me grace and I refused to give it back. A few of the bridesmaids backed away from Vanessa, whispering. Beatrice beamed like a proud aunt. Oh, he's his mother's son, after all. Vanessa turned her attention to the crowd, now uneasy and murmuring. You're all being manipulated, she cried, desperate. His mom is unstable. She's been obsessed ever since his father died, always inserting herself. Enough. It wasn't Thomas who said it. Eleanor stepped forward now, her voice even and clear. You can say anything you want about me, Vanessa. I've heard worse. But do not mistake decency for weakness or silence for submission. She walked toward the center, each step a declaration. My son may have been lost in your fantasy, but he's not beyond truth. And neither am I, Vanessa scoffed. You're just bitter because he wouldn't sell you that old dump of a house. That house, Eleanor interrupted, is where I held him through fevers, read to him through thunderstorms, and kept the memory of a man who adored us both alive. That house isn't mine. It's ours. Thomas stepped down from the altar now, his hand shaking slightly. He reached Eleanor, embraced her silently. Dozens of guests murmured approval. One woman even clapped. Vanessa stood still, breath rapid, her shoulders now trembling. Then, suddenly, she ran literally across the patio, down the side path, toward the driveway. Veil trailing behind her like a flag of defeat. Someone dropped their champagne glass. Nobody followed. Thomas and Eleanor stood side by side, raw and speechless, facing the ruins of what could have been a wedding and what had become something deeper. Freedom. Eleanor turned to him, eyes wet. You believed me? I almost didn't, he said. And that's what I'm going to regret for a long time. The wedding was over before it ever began. Guests filtered out in slow, awkward waves. Conversations lowered to whispers, and glances toward Eleanor shifted from pity to quiet admiration. The air had changed. The performance was canceled. The illusion shattered. But what lingered the most wasn't relief. It was exhaustion. A kind that came from months, maybe years, of pretending. You didn't see what your instinct was screaming at you to confront. Thomas sat beside Eleanor on a bench behind the venue, his tuxedo jacket draped over his knees. He hadn't said much. In the last 20 minutes, other than, I'm sorry, 3 times in a row, She didn't need him to say anything more. His silence was loud enough. Eleanor reached into her tote and pulled out a bottle of water, handing it to him like only a mother would quiet. Thoughtful, unconditional. "I don't know who I am right now," he finally said, voice raw. "You're still you," she whispered, just finally back in one piece. He looked out over the rolling lawns, watching vendors pack up tables and flowers that no longer had a purpose. "I really thought I was building a life." He muttered, "You were," Eleanor said, placing a gentle hand on his. "Just not the right one." He leaned back, tears brimming but restrained. "I was so caught up in proving something. That I could be someone. That I could rise above where we came from." His voice cracked then. "And I used you as the measuring stick, as if staying close to you meant I hadn't gone far enough." Eleanor stared forward, jaw tight. "I didn't raise you to transcend your past, Thomas. I raised you to love it because that's where you were loved first." He finally allowed one tear to fall. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "That's not up for you to decide, baby," she replied. "That's mine. And you already have it." Her voice trembled. But she didn't cry. Not now. She had cried too much in private for moments like this not to be sacred. Did Dad ever make huge mistakes? Thomas asked softly. Eleanor chuckled. "Honey, your father once painted the living room lavender, swore it was gray." A small smile crept into Thomas's face. "He also dropped the wedding cake the day before our reception. Had to order pizza?" She nudged him. "This isn't the worst disaster in family history," he laughed genuinely, for the first time in months. But the reprieve was short-lived. Just then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. His expression turned cold. "What is it?" Laner asked. "Vanessa," he muttered. "She's posted something already." He clicked on the social media app. A blurry photo of Thomas walking away from the altar was now circulating with captions like, "Left me at the aisle during a breakdown," and hashtags twisting the narrative. Hashtag mental health matters, hashtag wedding gone wrong. Within minutes, blogs and gossip accounts had picked it up, spinning the story as a tragic romantic fallout caused by Thomas's emotional instability. "She's trying to get ahead of the truth," Eleanor whispered. Thomas nodded, his jaw clenched. "Control the story so she stays the victim." More messages came in, some from colleagues, others from acquaintances, unsure of what to think. One friend even asked if Eleanor had interfered again. Again, that word stung like acid in the back of her throat. "I'll fix it," Thomas said, already typing something. Eleanor placed a hand over his before he could hit send. "No, not now." "But you don't owe the world a reaction. When you're still bleeding, take a breath. Let this pain form a message, not a panic." He met her eyes. Calm, steady, wise. "You sound like Dad." She squeezed his hand. "No, I finally sound like me." Later that evening, back at Eleanor's house, the walls felt warmer somehow. Maybe because they were filled with the quiet hum of life again. Thomas had changed into an old t-shirt and track pants, staring at the family photos lined up on the hallway shelf. In one, a 6-year-old Thomas wore a bucktooth grin covered in spaghetti sauce. Eleanor stood behind him, tired, messy bun, but laughing. "Can I stay here a few days?" he asked from behind her. She turned slowly. "Of course, I don't want to go back to that apartment. It feels foreign." He nodded. "There's always room for you here," she said. There always had been. As the night deepened, Thomas sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. Across the room, Eleanor folded laundry. Their movements were synced in a familiar rhythm, one that time had not erased. He clicked open a file folder titled Vanessa Victims Evidence. Rebecca had given him, "Mom, do you think I should go public with all this?" "If you don't," she said gently, "someone else will be her next target." He closed his eyes, took a breath, and opened another browser window. He drafted an open letter. It's honest, but not bitter. It's firm, but not vengeful. He told the story from the beginning of how he'd lost sight of who he was and almost lost his mother in the process. How manipulation wears the mask of charm. How silence helps predators survive, and how love, even at its quietest, can roar. Back to life at the very moment you feel beyond redemption. I'm going to share this tomorrow, he said. Let the world know the truth. For the other guys she hurt. And for me, so I can close this chapter the right way. Eleanor nodded. A mother's job, she said tenderly, is to save her child once if she can. And stand back to watch him save himself after that. He looked over at her, and this time he didn't just see his mother. He saw the woman who fought for their healing when he didn't even know they were broken. The morning sun streamed through the linen curtains of the room, bringing with it the strange peace that always accompanies the most intimate breakdown. Eleanor felt the warmth on her skin as if it were a reminder. You survived. More than that, did what needed to be done at the breakfast table. Thomas sat quietly, slowly scrolling through his timeline. His post from the night before the testimony about Vanessa, the manipulation. The details of the other victims had gone viral. 100,000 shares, thousands of comments. Most in support. People are finally hearing the truth, he said without. Looking up, Vanessa's company had issued a chilling statement, saying she was undergoing emotional treatment and would not comment at this time. But that didn't stop the other two exes Rebecca mentioned from contacting Thomas that same night. And the three, in an act of silent solidarity, decided to do something together. We're going to create a project focused on emotional education. For young men, you know, teaching about boundaries, recognizing manipulation. Abusive cycles, Thomas explained. Eleanor felt a warmth in her chest, a calm, fertile pride like earth after rain. James would have loved this, she said. Thomas smiled. Maybe he's seeing it now. That afternoon, Eleanor went to the local market. For the first time in months, she took her time. She walked slowly, chose fruit carefully, exchanged a few words with acquaintances who greeted her kindly. I heard about the wedding. How brave, Eleanor. You protected your boy, as always. She smiled, but inside, something new was stirring. It wasn't his fault. It was identity. She had spent 55 years of her life as a nurse, a wife, a mother, supporting, caring, sacrificing. But now, for the first time, she asked herself, who takes care of me? Beatrice, as usual, showed up uninvited that evening with 2 glasses of wine, brie, cheese, and a pamphlet for a local book club. You need to sign up. First Thursday of the month. Women over 50. No boring books, and there's sparkling wine. Eleanor laughed. Do I still remember how to meet new people? Beatrice arched an eyebrow. You took on a psychopathic con artist and saved your son's pride in front of 200 people, honey. I think you can handle a few retired women talking about historical romance. Eleanor took the pamphlet and read the description carefully. There, in small print, was a phrase that stuck to her chest like a tattoo. Mature women don't start from scratch. They start with experience and call it freedom. The next day, Thomas went to his old law office. The environment felt strange to him now, sterile, like a version of his ego that no longer fit. He had asked for a meeting with the partners, not to return, but to leave. I have made up my mind. I want to start something new, he said firmly and calmly. The silence in the room was surprising. Then one of the partners, a gray-haired man named Marcus, spoke. You will regret it. Thomas just smiled. I hope so, 'cause that will mean I'm learning. On his way out, he stopped on the sidewalk, took a deep breath, and called a contact he had exchanged ideas with years ago. When he was still volunteering at shelters. Look. I've made up my mind. I want to work in affordable housing and accessible urban planning. If you have any projects ready, call me. I'll learn everything from scratch. Days later, he was already visiting the first plots of land with the team. Thomas felt clean inside, like he dived into a lake after years of being trapped in the desert of his own masks. Meanwhile, Eleanor had her first night at book club. She entered shyly, till she realized that some women already knew her, or rather had already heard of her. "You are the brave mother, aren't you?" She smiled. "I'm just a woman who refused to be silenced." And for the first time in neighborhoods, laughter flowed easily from her. Unhurried conversations, a light flirtation with a funny-souled widower who loved to cook. Another woman in the circle, named Claire, a widow of 2 marriages and with colorful rings on her hands, said a phrase that Eleanor took home and revisited as a silent prayer before going to sleep. After 50, we no longer want to please others. We want to belong to ourselves. And that night, lying in her own bed, Eleanor smiled. The following week, Thomas finalized the public legal process, helping Vanessa's other 2 exes file charges. The press began reporting on the cases in more depth. Investigators opened an official case. Vanessa disappeared from town, but the marks remained. Scars were faint, barely noticeable in a world that moved too fast. But for Eleanor and Thomas, every pause was still sacred. One Sunday morning, Eleanor found an envelope on her porch. It was Thomas's. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Mom, for a long time I thought growing up meant leaving you behind. Now I understand growing up is actually having the courage to find you again. I don't just love you, I admire who you are. Thank you for never giving up on me. Love, Thomas." She held the paper with both hands, feeling each line as if it were the most silent and necessary hug in the world. And in the silence of that morning, touched by the golden light filtering through the plants in the window, she allowed herself to simply exist, whole, unbroken, present. 3 months later, Eleanor's house looked different, not for the furniture. In the kitchen, Eleanor watered a small herb garden she and Thomas had started in the back garden. Chives, basil, thyme smells from his childhood, when she would cure colds with soup and affection. Thomas no longer lived there, but he came by almost every weekend. Now involved in, "I don't earn what I used to," he had said one day, "but, Mother, I sleep with my shoulders down for the first time in years." Eleanor understood. There was no price for the kind of peace that came when you decided to stop fighting who you really were. One afternoon, while reviewing the papers of the small NGO that Thomas helped found, Eleanor entwined her glasses in her graying hair. No hurry to dye it. She looked at her reflection from the side, and for the first time in a long time, she liked what she saw. "I wasn't trying to look young. I was trying to look like ... her, and I was succeeding at the book club." She now sat closest to Claire, Beatrice, and a curious new member who had joined the group. Henry the widower, who wore funny ties and questioned every literary twist as if he loved to provoke smiles. And one evening, Tomu took Eleanor to a small community lecture at a cultural center. In town, the topic was family, truth, and late starts. At the end of the speech, he called her to the stage. She shyly refused, but he insisted. "This is the woman who taught me everything that matters," he said. The audience gave a standing ovation, and Eleanor in that moment felt more alive than on any other birthday, Christmas, because that was what she needed to learn. She was always enough. Even when the world tried to diminish her to the role of forgotten mother of the groom, she was Eleanor Martin, retired nurse. In the last scene of that intimate journey that only the heart recognizes as essential, Eleanor was sitting in they drank iced tea, watching the sun set and the golden light spread like a blessing. "Do you regret not selling the house?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I only regret the times I doubted my intuition for fear of losing you." Thomas was silent. Then he said, "You never lost me, Mom." She smiled, letting the words settle into her bones like a blanket. A light breeze. Blue dot, and when no words remained, only the sound of trees and birds. Eleanor knew she was exactly where she needed to be, next to those who mattered, within herself. With hope that no matter how many years pass, no matter how much wounds hurt, there is always time to start over. There is always time to go home. There's no statute of limitations on truth or on love. and no age limit to becoming your own hero. This story touched you? Share it, comment below. Subscribe for more powerful narratives that honor the strength and complexity of women over 50. Because we don't fade, we rise. Wiser and louder than ever.